I'm Tracy Austin, your host of the People Strategy Podcast. This show provides interviews with organizational leaders and ongoing coaching experiences that highlight elevating people in organizations through a people strategy roadmap.
Maybe it just takes a coach or a mentor to frame the question or this accountability idea differently, that here are the tools that you have and some of the things you can do to try to help your team be more accountable for the goals that they may be. You can, have weekly meetings.
Welcome to the People Strategy Podcast. My name is Tracy Austin. I am your host and the Chief Talent Officer at Elevated Talent Consulting. And we are in the middle of our leadership development series on the podcast. And with me again for our fourth time is Adam Gruszcynski. And Adam is with Potawatomi Casino Hotel. Adam, welcome back.
Good morning, Tracy. Thanks for having me again for the fourth time. Looking forward to it. And I think we're going to have a fun conversation today.
Yeah, because we're talking about accountability today. And it's funny how we both kind of pushed on. This is the fourth time, but yet first times are the hardest ones, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
So as we talk about accountability and working with new leaders on accountability, that first time that they start to hold somebody accountable typically doesn't go very well.
No, I think that is a true statement. And those getting into leadership for the first time, this is a new area for them that they may not have had experience with. So I'm excited that we're going to be talking about it today.
Yeah. And so, you know how I love stats. So I'm going to jump into stats here in a second. But before I do that, accountability at times kind of has a bad reputation. And I'm curious, like when you think about accountability, what first shows up for you?
I think I have not been into the management field as long as I have been in like the actual in the weeds doing field. And my hat kind of goes back to the doer field, is that if I'm being held accountable to, my mind thinks, well, I'm not doing something right and I'm doing something wrong, or I'm not meeting a deadline, and whoever my direct report is going to have a conversation with me, and it's not going to be pleasant. And I think, now that my roles are reversed, that's not necessarily true. I don't think anyone wants to have an unpleasant conversation with anyone. They want it to be productive and positive and help the individual or the team or the organization, the department, achieve the goals that need to be achieved to make the business a success. So it's kind of fun how I've evolved on my thinking of accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's great about accountability is it is the structure that we put in place to ensure that we can hit those outcomes that we really want, right? So, a lot of times in our leadership development program, we're talking a lot about how do we design accountability for our team so that, it's truly in the design of our processes. So sometimes that goes into things like a process like entrepreneurial operating system, or using boards like Asana or Monday.com, right? Those are all designed accountability.
Yep. Or you can even go even old school. If you walked into my office, you would see 4 whiteboards with all different teams on it and all the things that I'm tracking on them to help keep them accountable that we know we have to get done. So you don't have to use all the latest.
I've got that right behind me too, Don't you love how the camera shifts?
Sometimes the old school methods are the best methods.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So that designed accountability, and then we have inspired accountability is, how do we create the conditions that have individuals want to hit every single one of those targets and feel that they truly can, that they're supported to do so?
Yeah, and I think that is more the optimal goal of accountability that you want, but obviously the trickier one to achieve, because getting the person or the team to buy into what the end goal is, to get them motivated enough to hit deadlines, hit milestones of the project or whatever it is you're working on, is a little bit trickier. So as a leader, trying to paint the story or craft the narrative to get that buy-in is a little bit trickier. But if you can figure that out and how to get the buy-in, it's going to make the project or whatever you're trying to achieve that much easier and that much more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just talk about what accountability is. So I'm curious, if you were to define accountability, how would you define it?
holding an individual or a group, I don't want to use the word accountable, but I can't think of what else comes to mind, that whatever the established end goal is, that end goal is achieved either by a specific time or by a certain criteria that says this is completed. And if that isn't met, working with the team to figure out why that couldn't have been met. Can something be done differently? Is there a roadblock preventing you from achieving success? Removing that roadblock together to get that back on track to make that a successful project.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Mm.
One of my mentors had always mentioned, he broke it out like this. He goes, accountability is how much of what by when. I was like, is that simple? How much of what by when? And I'm like, does that apply to everything? And I'm like, well, we can maybe, shift it a little bit, but so often that by when is what's missing. Like, what is the deadline? Right. And what exactly is it that we need to get done, right? And there's a key distinction between an output and an outcome. So like when we're designing the accountability structures for our team, an output example would be we're doing a podcast and we're putting it out. An outcome example would be that you have 5 people apply for the latest IT position that opens up at Potawatomi. Or an outcome could be that, we have folks that, we fill our next leadership development program that we're holding, right? Those are outcomes from the output. So when we're creating accountability, we're naming what exactly it is that we want for both those outputs and those outcomes.
Sure. No, I think your definition of how much of what by when is really quite simple and an easy definition to understand. And that piece about having a by when established, I think, is a crucial piece of that, because if you say this is something I need, but you don't give them that due date, you're leaving it open-ended so that they may understand it's important, but can't really measure how important it is because they have no idea when it's due. So it could be a month, it could be 2 months, it could be 3 months, and they're actively working on it. But if it's needed much sooner and you don't establish that, you're setting the team or the individual up for failure. And I think establishing that by when date is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some stats because, we know that I love stats here. And then let's jump back into a couple examples of how does this actually work, especially for our new leaders listening in and going, Tracy and Adam, holding somebody accountable scares the heck out of me because that means I have to have a conversation that feels negative. And guess what? That's not always the case. So some stats, 82% of managers say that they have little to no ability to hold others accountable successfully.
That's a pretty alarming stat because that's almost the majority of managers say that, which I don't think is true. It just maybe one of the things they think about initially is that way. But if you actually were to talk to them or maybe coach them, they'd realize they actually do have tools and resources at their disposal to hold others accountable and effectively do it. They just maybe need it reframed. We talked about coaching and mentoring and maybe it just takes a coach or a mentor to frame the question or this accountability idea differently, that here are the tools that you have and some of the things you can do to try to help your team be more accountable for the goals that they may be. You can, have weekly meetings, create a priority list and then update that regularly. You could have calendar, I need this for this project due at this time. Use tools that you mentioned like Monday.com to help organize work and track work. There's a lot of things managers have to hold people accountable, but maybe they just, don't realize it, and having a simple conversation makes that light bulb go on in their head and be like, oh, I do have this. I do have the power. Let's go. This isn't as hard as I think it is.
Yeah. And, guess what? Whatever we believe will become true. So if you think you can't hold another accountable, you can't. And here's the deal. Can we ever make anyone do anything? The answer is no. But what we can control is the way in which we show up and we lead and we design that accountability. So what I love about kind of what you just named is there's ways of designing accountability to get some projects done. Can I share with you one of my favorites that I think
Absolutely.
Almost all of our clients are now using, and it's just it's really cool. And that is let me ask this. Are you guys doing monthly one-on-ones with your direct reports?
I have weekly one-on-ones with my direct
Okay.
reports.
Amazing.
Yep.
I love how you kind of laugh at that. You're like, we take it a step further.
I got one better. I'm doing it weekly. So.
We're in the one-upping phase now, Adam.
Your turn, go.
So within that, one of the things that we encourage our leaders to do is to, especially at the beginning, follow up with their team with, especially if there is some issues with accountability, is to follow up and say, hey, Adam, thanks so much for a conversation today. And again, when I follow up with you, I just want to be clear, I'm going to reply to the calendar invite that was in place for us to meet that had our agenda in it. So step 1 is send a calendar invite. Step 2, make sure there's an agenda in your calendar invite. Step 3, after the conversation, reply to that calendar invite that has the agenda in it that shows that you actually met, right? And hey, Adam, thanks so much for the conversation today. Just want to make sure we both heard the same things and we both have the same action steps going forward. Here are the 3 things that I promised you. I promised you to do whatever by when. So think about the accountability equation we came up with. How much of what by when? So, I said that I was going to send you this podcast that I was going to send you by end of day today. Done. Here's the link to it. I said that I was going to send you this outline and SOP for this project that we have going on right now. Link, done, right? So whatever you promise them, you're going to put first. And then you're going to list, and I don't do more than 3 because our brains can't handle it. Here's the 3 things that you promised me. How much of what by when? Please let me know if you heard the same thing or if you heard something different. So it's this very simple email template that responds back to the meeting. That's designed accountability. Now, if I step aside and put my HR hat on for being in HR for over 20 years, right? Knowing that there's times that we need to hold individuals accountable and get things in writing, guess what? We have now in writing a back and forth with the employee emailing us back and saying, yep, this all sounds great to me. Now, if they don't do that, now we have that documentation for it. And not that we're trying to build a performance plan here, but what we're doing is if we start to need that information, now we have it. But even more so than that, we forget about things. And now we have everything in writing. We can go back to it. We can see it. If your email links in with something like a Monday, guess what? Now it's already in that system too.
Yep. And I would offer a pro tip that I've used to augment what you've said is that if you are establishing a by when deliverable, I have so much going on in my day-to-day here at Potawatomi that, all right, if I say I need something by this date, I will set up a calendar reminder shortly after whenever that by when is established to remind me to follow up if I haven't gotten something by them to actually help with the accountability. Because as being a leader, if I'm saying something is due, well, it's my job to make sure that when that date is established, that thing is done. And this is just a reminder to help me to make sure that the deliverable is being met.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a part of that, designed accountability, especially if it's somebody's first time doing something. They're not really sure what they're doing. They don't have the confidence in it yet. That check-in also shows, a little bit of compassion for, I know you're learning. I want to support this to be successful, but accountability goes both ways, right? You as their leader is also accountable for that thing getting done. So leaving it to the end and, especially when they're learning something new, you want to make sure that they have the support. Now, if they've been doing it a long time and they're strong in their role, no, we don't need micromanagers there, right?
Right. Absolutely. No one wants to micromanage.
Yeah.
I take that back. Some might, but yeah, it's a hard job to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was our first stat, which was 82% of managers say that they have little to no ability to hold others accountable successfully. So we've just given you a couple kind of tips for accountability is designing it utilizing a system. We also talked about setting agendas in meetings with a follow-up email that lists out those accountabilities, and then the checking in with folks throughout the process, especially if it's something that they're learning new for the first time. Did I miss anything in the recap?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well.
Amazing. The People Strategy Podcast is sponsored by the Leadership Development Program offered through Elevated Talent Consulting. Do you have folks in your organization that have just been promoted from the doer to the leader? Well, we have a program specifically for you that trains on the specific ways for an individual to be a leader versus to be the doer of all of the things. In this program, we partner with learners to experience and create their own leadership around time management, delegation, coaching, accountability, and change management. Head to the link at the bottom of this page to find out more and sign up. So the second stat that I have is that 91% of employees would say that effectively holding others accountable is one of their company's top leadership development needs. So I always love to hear like, hey, what do managers think? Then what do employees think? And when they're aligned, because sometimes they're not aligned, like this is pretty closely aligned. So essentially, folks don't do a good job at accountability. And, this is one of those key areas in the leadership development program that we find is most needed from the direct supervisors that are sending their leaders through it. So in our leadership development program, we have the direct supervisors fill out a survey for their employee that's going through the program of what they most need to learn throughout the program. And this is always pretty much number one.
Yeah, it is pretty surprising to see that how close the statistics line up from 82% to 91% are in agreement. Accountability is something that needs improvement upon throughout most organizations. And I think, that's, telling because other people within teams or departments or organizations know when people aren't cutting the mustard and aren't being held accountable. And it kind of has, a somewhat demoralizing effect, I think, on other teams, because if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing and someone or another team is not, and everyone knows about it and they're not being held accountable, well, why should I be making my goals or doing everything I should if if he or she or a team is slacking off? I don't have to work as hard, or I don't have to, put in the extra hours because they're not, and there's no accountability to it. And it can have the potential to have a negative effect on culture within a team organization. So it's very interesting statistics that those two line up so close.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our listeners, I would really love for you to think about what this looks like inside of your organization. Mm-hmm. And if those things are aligned or not aligned, and really looking at, all right, how can you very simply design some accountability to move the needle on it? Because a lot of times it's not a ton, right? And it's like, if we think back to a couple of weeks ago or last week where we talked about coaching and appreciation, how do we appreciate folks so that we're leading them the way that they need to be led, which really leads into our last stat that I have for this week, which is 86% of employees believe that they are not managed the way that they need to be managed. Said a different way, 14% of employees feel that their performance is managed the way that they need to be managed. And that to me is incredibly scary. Yet it goes back to what we talked about last week, which one of those drivers of employee engagement is the leader leading the employee the way they need to be led. And so when we think about that, Adam, I'm curious, how do you know how to lead your team members?
I think my personal experience has been trial and error. That I try a management style that I think will work based off of my interactions with the individual, and I will give it a go. And if I see I'm not getting the results I want, or the individual isn't responding to my management style the way I think to be successful, well, the person on the other end may not be doing anything wrong. It's how I'm presenting my leadership. So do I need to do some self-reflection and say, do I need to change my style? Maybe they're very I thought they were very specifically task driven, where you have to lay out, all right, I want you to do this, 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 and this. And once that's done, all right, here you go, and track it through, a Monday.com or some form of tool that manages work like that. Or are they just very high level, like this is the end goal. I know you know how to get to it. Boom, go. And if you have any roadblocks, come talk to me. If not, I know you got this and you know how to get from A to Z. And if things don't work, there's just different management styles that are at your disposal. But it's one of those trial and error things that I found has worked well for me, where I'm able to give my team instructions and lead them the way they want to be needed. At least I think that's the case, and they're not the 14% that say, hey, yeah, we're not actually being motivated well here. So that's a curious question I'm going to ask in my next one-on-one of all my managers.
Amazing. You know that we have an easy button for this, right?
I am not aware. Please share.
Yeah. So most of our listeners are aware, but we utilize something called predictive index, which is a behavioral assessment, but it really looks at how do you need to be led? And there's a manager strategy guide that will come out of that essentially says, if I'm leading you, Adam, this is how you need to be led. And here's what I will say on any assessment is the person is always going to be the expert on themselves. It's great because it gives us common language. So I'd say, hey, do you think that this is correct? And you'd be like, yeah, no, whatever, right? Like whatever that is, once we're in agreement on it, is this how you need to be led? And if you tell me yes, I'm going to look at that and go, okay, I think the 3 areas I'm failing you right now in leading you is this, this, and this. What do you believe? Yeah, I think yes or no, or whatever that is. Now we've opened up a 2-way conversation to accountability and inspiring and designing that accountability to lead the individual the way that they need to be led.
How does one go about getting that easy button then?
Well, I'll tell you what, I will put a behavioral assessment link inside of the show notes for today, and you and I can have an additional conversation about that one. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
And I think another piece of this is something that you talked quite a bit about a couple minutes ago, and that was accountability in our performance doesn't just impact ourselves and our immediate manager. It impacts not only our team, but other teams as well. And one of those key ways that we've seen with our clients of really impacting accountability is doing cascading goals or waterfalling goals, whatever fancy word you want to use. But essentially, here's the organizational goal for this year and this quarter, right? And it might be a profitability number, it might be a revenue number, it might be whatever, right? Well, what is that very specific top 3 goals for your team? And how do those 3 goals align with the organizational goals? And how do my individual goals impact the team goals? When we cascade our goals, now we can see the impact all the way through the organization as to why. And so often we also see how those goals impact other team members and other teams. Now it's about much more than us. And we've created accountability across to peers and across teams versus just up down. So we're creating that self and peer level accountability.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, that if you can also show the why of why these things are important, it might help get that buy-in where accountability is made easier because they understand why they're doing the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I am so curious, what are some of the key takeaways that have pinged for you throughout our conversation on accountability today?
The example you gave of how to keep accountability easy using email, of just having a calendar appointment, listing out the agenda, and then using that email invite of the meeting to keep the dialogue back and forth going, saying, all right, this is what we talked about. These are the deliverables from myself. These are the deliverables for you. Here are my deliverables. When can I expect? And then establishing that trail of that conversation. Like you said, not that we ever want to have a performance plan or go to HR about somebody, but it's good to have that established if in case that time and situation does occur.
And PS, your HR team will love you for it. So yeah, absolutely.
Always want to keep human resources happy. Yes.
Amazing. And, Adam, thank you so much for coming on again. I so appreciate kind of the banter back and forth and, really just the privilege of the impact of sharing this with folks and seeing the impact that it has within organizations. So thanks so much for joining us for these conversations. We will have 4 more of them. So join us next week and have a great week.
Thanks, Tracy. Take care. Be good.
Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Tracy, TRACI Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.